Hello there. This is Sean from Robots, Detectives, and Spies. We're doing the Shin series, which is a series of films made in Japan called Shin Godzilla, Shin Ultraman, and Shin Kamen Rider. Doing a little bit of a different format today, a little bit more vlogging. Testing out this new camera I got. I've only used it for a few things so far, so yeah. So to start it off, we'll talk about Shin Masked Rider, as it's called here in the States, or I guess in North America, or Shin Kamen Rider. I can't remember what common means, but it might mean this. It might be just a translation or something. But yeah. So of the three films, Shin Masked Rider is the most recent, coming out, I think 2023, 2024, somewhere around that time. I'm doing the order here, which is sort of my personal preference, but reverse. So Shin Masked Rider will be first. I think it's a interesting film. Maybe even a well-made film, but it's not my. It's a little bit opaque. I did watch the first episode of the original Kamen Rider series from the late 60s to sort of get a sense of what the original show was like and kind of compare it to its source material. Part of the issue, and I feel like it was a little bit similar to that Superman film that just came out, is it condenses a lot of material down to the running time of a feature-length film. There's a concept where they have I probably need to explain at least with the basics of what it is. The Masked Rider, or the main character, is like a cyborg that's been augmented. And he rides a motorcycle and fights other cyborgs, or I guess they've been both probably genetically and mechanically modified. And that's a thing that is both true for the original show and this reimagining, because Shin in Japanese means new. So like new Godzilla, new Ultraman, new Masked Rider. I like a lot of the stuff in the Masked Rider, the designs of the vehicles, the design of like the transformation and the suits. It has that kind of it's reimagining. It's a reimagining that looks really sort of faithful stylistically. All these films will use music and sound effects from the original series in a really interesting way. They even do stuff where they have sort of echoed flourishes where the Masked Rider will show up on the edge of a cliff, and this is kind of like snap zoom thing that the original series would do. It's a bit corny, but it's a hallmark of the old television series. What is really weird is the tone and how convoluted it is. The convoluted nature of it, it's less straightforward than like the Godzilla film. Even though the Godzilla films are more complicated, you don't need as much context because the characters in the world, the human characters, are out of their depth and kind of learning as the audience learns. Actually, the audience probably has more context than they do because they've seen other Godzilla films and have some basic understanding of how his powers work and all that. Where in Shin Masked Rider, which is based off of Kamen Rider, or I think it was known as Masked Rider here when it was released in America, is they cut off the earlier bits of the episode where they explain a bit more of the background of the character. I think he has a different story. I don't know if it's based off a different comic or manga, as they call it there. But it's a little jarring because in the original series, it starts with him escaping. Starts with him learning about how he's like an insanely high IQ, how he was picked for the experiment. There's even some comments from the guys doing the experiments about some of the reasoning about the organization, how all-encompassing their resources are. It's pretty it's got that kind of low-budget charm to it. None of these newer films are particularly high budget. They're probably, I think, less than 25 million a piece in American money. I'm not sure how many yen that would be, but yeah, the old series, all the stuff looks very much of its time, but kind of charming. There's a word in Japanese I can't remember, but it's all three of these movies fall under that kind of special effects suits thing. There's a word for it. I can't remember what it's called, but kaiju battles, kaiju monsters, and all that stuff kind of fall under that. So like something like Pacific Rim is kind of riffing on that. But yeah, it's really convoluted to this. It feels like they took the original run of the television show or the comic and tried to take stuff that would have been more organically paced and kind of combine it. Like the main character is supposedly modeled after a grasshopper and rides a motorcycle. There's another character in the original series, I believe. I didn't get that far into the show. I got maybe 1 or 2 episodes. I can't remember at this point. But in the original show, which was about a half hour long, that character would appear like 14 episodes in, and then show up a few episodes later. There was a little bit more of a twist on like his whatever. I think it's called Double Rider or something in the original show, which is what they call in the movie too. But in the context of the movie, you have you have he shows up like halfway through, like a 2-hour movie, maybe a little bit sooner than that, which isn't like bad per se, but it does mean that you also have to deal with, they have multiple villains that would have probably had at least their own episodes. You have the main villain whose plan borders on like nonsense. I think if you were to explain it, it's very anime, it's very JRPG. We gotta go kill a guy that's the false god kind of thing or something. I think he has some kind of device that's gonna like destroy the afterlife or something. I've seen it twice. If I did a more conventional review, I would probably have it gone through it line by line, but it's not. It's very confusing, and a lot of characters' motivations and stuff are tied into the specifics of the world, which I'm not sure is the same in the original show, if they had more time to explain it, or if it's, that show probably came out like, 50 plus years ago? Yeah, 67, so almost 60 years ago. I think it's in about 67, so, around the same time the original Star Trek came out, but you can't. Some of that stuff where they're like, here's a character that has the same power set as you, the specifics of what the evil organization are doing, where they made the main character, and they also made loads of other cyborgs all around the world to do something. And then the other guy that has any kind of stated motivation has really convoluted, not even take over the world, more like take over reality and change the entire nature of consciousness. It's hard to explain. I'm probably not doing the best job of that. It's fine, but the other thing is the tone. It's at times very sincere, very earnest, a bit more over the top than the 2 other films I'm talking about. But then also really like tongue-in-cheek, a little bit strange in other places. It's a bit with a scorpion lady where they show her, she has some weird things about that, and then there's a bunch of people that die to take her out, and then they you think it's going to be like, oh, that's a setup for the main character to go and fight this weird scorpion lady, and he's like, oh no, that we took her out ourselves, had heavy casualties, and you're like, cool, that makes all kinds of it's that's not that it doesn't make sense, it's just weird from why include it kind of thing. There might be a specific reasoning for that, which does not make it particularly bad or good, but more on the lines of wish this light would change, more along the lines of like, not you got a lot of limited screen time, why include stuff that's a little bit more tone setting and a little bit of a kind of odd note to play at this point. But yeah, I plus I just didn't care for the sequence. But anywho, it's interesting. It's one reason why I'm starting with it, because I have much more positive things to say about the other two films. The first one in the series being Shin Godzilla, and the next one being Ultraman. Yeah, I don't know what there's really to say about Masked Rider, Kamen Rider. At some point, if I do go through the TV show, I may do another video on that. But at this point, I am, it's 100 plus episodes, so I just don't know if I'll quite get to that. That's whatever, divide that in half, so 50 hours, give or take, of television in another language. It's serialized, so I'm curious about that. But you know, it'd be kind of like watching I think it makes more sense in like a Captain Scarlet episode or something like that, but that might be too obscure. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that. It's, if you have, I can't tell you if having more familiarity is I don't know, would that be like a boon to understand the show better, if you, the sort of blankennial, just how much screen time every character has. Maybe if you've read the comic books and seen the other shows, it might just be cool to see the characters. You don't require as much context. But it does feel like there's a lot of context, then it gets really weird where it decides to go. So the stuff it does spend time on, I'm not as on board with as some of the more, I don't know, creature feature kind of stuff. Yeah, the other thing with it being is in terms of tone, there's actually a lot of blood, which I was kind of surprised by. From what I've seen the original series, there's not a lot, or if any. I think it was retooled into more of a children's thing, and then or at least a family thing. And then in the movie, just you watch him like punch a guy, and also like oh, that's feels incongruent, because it's not very, I don't know, it's what you would expect in like, I don't know, like a TV show based off of Doom or something, more or less, in the show about a guy that's a cyborg grasshopper fighting spider and bat people. But whatever, I don't know. It threw me off the first time I saw it. Second time I had seen it in terms of working towards this podcast vlog thing, I was a little bit more used to the concept, but I don't know, it still feels incongruent. There's a lot of weird stuff where sometimes in science fiction, you know, having a character like, oh, that character's a robot or a cyborg or a genetic mutant, and it also kind of messes with their motivations, and you know, characters can kind of flip on a dime because of, you know, some guy flipped a switch. There's not a ton of that per se, but there's a lot of like, oh, that character's a robot or a synth or like a replicant or something. I don't know. I almost would want like a whole thing in terms of like explaining at least the state of technology in this world and how it differs from ours. You don't need a character to, per se, walk out and go, here's a whiteboard. In our world, we have this and this and that, which is different than yours. But at least be like, I don't know, like, it's, if this thing's a robot, it does technically have a soul in terms of like the canon or something. I'm putting in air quotes because what does that even mean in practical terms? But yeah, I don't know. I didn't hate it. Didn't really love it. Out of my weird scoring system, let's say out of 3 stars, I would be I'd solid 2. Yeah, I'm not going to explain my rating system. But anyways, going up in terms of enjoyment, we end up with Shin Godzilla, which I've seen the most recent of these because it was re-released in theaters. And I actually think it's of the more recent Japanese Godzilla films, which would be Shin Godzilla in 2016, and I think 2023 Godzilla -1. I think it's probably my favorite. There's stuff that both films do better than each other, but it's a much more conventional thriller mixed in with a little bit of political satire. I kind of commented a bit on, I don't know too much about Japan's politics, but it's very interesting. I just like the whole, like, there's a scene where Godzilla's making its way to shore and you're looking at the Prime Minister's cabinet and they're going like, all right, whose responsibility would it be once it leaves the water and goes on the shore, and they have to go through all this kind of procedure and red tape and all that. And plus you have characters that tend to be a little bit more, maverick isn't the right term, but just kind of wanting to kind of just get on to, saving lives and stuff and having to fight against the more procedural elements of government and all that stuff. But at the same time, though, it's hard to not, their frustration also is like not completely founded because some of those rules exist for a reason. But there's also commentary on, Japan's relationship with the United States and, some of the stuff about the nuclear war stuff and all that stuff. It's really interesting. It's, of the 3 films, I would call it the best movie. It feels less like a, I don't know what these would be. Like back in the 80s when they would do a whatever the movie kind of thing. It feels less like where they would take a bunch of random episodes of an old cartoon and make it into or currently running at the time cartoon to make it into like a movie. It's it kind of solves all the issues of other Godzilla films, with the exception of the original and a few other ones where the actual human characters were not that interesting to listen or talk to. So not that interesting to hear, their communication and how they, their thoughts. A lot of it was really kind of rote, like we have to have human characters, so here's our human characters. I do quite like it. It's very, there's a lot of characters. I think a lot of them are very well done, but there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of plot, there's a lot of machinations. So, and at one point in the story, it kind of, like the middle part of the story, it can kind of get, the pacing isn't consistent for the whole thing. But I think the beginning of the film and the end of the film are very strong. The other 2 films really struggle with the third act. I would say the third act in Ultraman's all right. The third act in Masked Rider is bizarre, and I did not care for it. Not necessarily bad, but it's very, very strange. So yeah, I would definitely say, out of the scoring system, I'd give it a 2.5 out of 3. Stars. Very watchable, very interesting. I saw on the big screen which definitely improved my opinion on it. I would definitely recommend Shin Godzilla to anyone who's a fan of kaiju films or Godzilla and all that stuff. With the caveat that you gotta read, so read or listen to a dub. But yeah, the dub's not bad, but I did prefer a few of these films with subtitles. I think I've seen at least two. No, I've only seen one out of the three dubbed. I'm not sure the state of the other two in terms of video releases and all that stuff. Anywho, so yeah, definitely like a lot of stuff in Godzilla. It felt a little bit more subtle, a little bit more subdued than like Godzilla -1, and a lot of interesting characters. Sometimes hard to tell them apart. A lot of that got easier on second viewing. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think it's the best running out of the three. If we go now to Shin Ultraman, it's the one I had the most fun with. I watched it first time I watched it by myself, the second time I watched it with a family. And it's very, what would the term I would use? It's very unpretentiously fun. There is some of the political commentary from Shin Godzilla. There's some of the weird esotericness of like trying to explain Ultraman's origins, but you're really just watching a film of a guy who can use a device and go toe to toe as a giant dude fighting kaiju monsters, hand to hand. Is it hand to hand, toe to toe, whatever the saying is. Which I thought was really fun. It reminds me of an old Peaky in the Brain episode, the spinoff of Animaniacs, where they accidentally hid a character that's supposed to be Ramon Burr from the American version of Godzilla from 50-something, and he goes to the same size as Godzilla, or at least their parody version, and then fights him, and it's a lot of fun, because you always, if you were a kid, that would be the first thing you do is think of a guy that could go stand just as tall as the monsters and fight them in hand-to-hand combat. But yeah, I don't know. The story has a lot of similar beats. It does have the same weird issues as a lot of science fiction does sometimes, where a character, their motivations get kind of weird because, it's technically like an alien being that dude, but somehow he still has the memories of the dude, and somehow, all that stuff. The ending of the film is more due to the implications of like the weird broader universe. So in Shin Godzilla, you actually probably, if you've seen any Godzilla film, it's very much a just Godzilla, nothing else. There's some new spins on Godzilla in terms of his design, but it's very similar to the first Godzilla and Godzilla -0 in terms of just having a Godzilla as an antagonist, where Ultraman fights a bunch of different creatures, and then you see other Ultraman type characters, and they have their own thing about their alien planet and backstory and lore, which it's a 2-hour movie. I don't know. I've never seen the Ultraman show. I did watch a little bit of Kamen Rider. I've seen a lot of Godzilla films over the years, or a few at least. But I wasn't confused by it, but it's a lot to have to, at some point you have scenes of two characters talking about, almost the Star Trek rules of like dealing with uncivilized planets or something while you're just kind of sitting there. It's interesting, but not quite as convoluted because you can still kind of figure out what some of the things mean and all that. But I would prefer maybe do that kind of stuff in the sequel, but I wouldn't call it bad, you know. Like I said, it didn't feel overstuffed in the same way that Masked Rider felt, where you're sitting there going, I'm not sure what this dude's thing's gonna do. I do actually know, like, rationally, but it's just the stakes of it just feel a bit odd. And yeah, like the villains and stuff were a little bit more understandable and less weird, and stuff like that. And there's some decent satire with some of the aliens trying to cut deals with the Japanese government, and then some stuff with the American government about them having to, you know, because of the complicated treaty and all that. Like I said, I mostly enjoyed it. But what's really fun about it is, like, from it's a bit like the ensemble cast of Shin Godzilla, but boiled down to less characters. So they're still trying to figure out things. There's still the interworkings of, organization trying to get ahead of all these disasters. But it's like a cast of like a handful of characters. You know, you don't have a bunch of random, assistants and secretaries, which I think really works well in Godzilla. I'm not sure if it would work in this film because the geopolitics are there, but they're much less of a focus. And so having an organization that's sort of tasked with figuring out why giant dinosaurs have showed up, and then them having to figure out what the deal with Ultraman is. It's very interesting. And then the characters don't feel as real people as they do in Shin Godzilla, which is unfortunate, but they are still entertaining. There's one character that has a bunch of Jerry Anderson's like Thunderbird stuff. He's got like the Thunderbirds. He's got stuff from, I think, some of these other shows. Like he's got a Enterprise from Star Trek on his desk. He's like the nerd character. So it's cool seeing all that stuff because there's a kind of a kinship between a lot of those kind of shows and those old Jerry Anderson shows from the UK in the late 60s with the puppets and miniatures and special effects. A very similar thing in my brain. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I watched it with my family, and some of them were bored with it, some of them weren't, probably because he had to read, which is, like I said, sometimes tough. Couldn't find a dub, which was unfortunate. Just because of the different ages, and some people are more proficient readers than others. But once you got past the opening, where you have words on screen, and then you also have the translation subtitles finding out with the on-screen text, a lot of montage. Once you get past that, it's pretty breezy. And so there's a lot of fun stuff. I think the visual effects from going from Shin Godzilla to Shin Ultraman, the visual effects are very much improved to a point where it at least looks it looks relatively okay. Still some weird jerky kind of animation where it sometimes feels like they can't quite figure out the more, I don't even know if natural is the right term. They must use a different process here, like motion capture or something. But I do wish maybe some of these ones would be improved if they did actually have guys in a suit, or if they're using guys in a suit, like motion capture or something like that. Just the original ones have kind of an odd charm to them that you don't quite get when it's a 3D render. Sometimes it looks really good in one shot, and other scene will look pretty rough. It's the case for all these. I think Shin Godzilla's probably got the weakest of all of them. I think Shin Godzilla might look a slightly bit better, at least on the big screen, than Godzilla -1 did. But I would have to look at it back to back, or at least screenshots from each. Sometimes it seems to be maybe specific creative decisions and stuff, but on balance or as a whole, very fun, very enjoyable film. I completely lost my train of thought here. I took to kind of wrap my thoughts up and kind of go over the series a bit. I think they're all three really fun. Sure, 2 out of 3 are very fun. Kind of Saturday morning cartoon and esque, but at the same time, there's I think a bit of satire and a little bit more. I don't know what the term would be. Just better writing in the case of Shin Godzilla. And Shin Ultraman, I feel like is a lot of fun. I would have a hard time recommending Shin Kamen Rider or Shin Masked Rider, just because of just how opaque some of the writing is. It's not bad, like say in a comparison thing, but the characters just harder to figure out the motivations. I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I did appreciate all 3 of them, at least from an ideas perspective and all that. So yeah, I would definitely recommend Shin Godzilla. I feel like that one is actually well realized, well written. I also would recommend Shin Ultraman. It's just a bit of fun. You also have just cool monster battles. It's hard to like a film where it's hard to dislike a film where you're watching a guy punch giant monsters in the face. And then yeah, I don't know. So yeah, this has been Robots, Detectives, and Spies. I've been Sean. I hope you have a good rest of your day.